The snow had been falling for hours, turning the quiet suburban street into a silent sea of white. The porch light flickered against the storm, revealing a young woman curled on the front steps, shivering, exhausted, and clutching her coat tightly as if holding herself together. Her name was Hannah Whitmore, and she had been waiting there since sunset, refusing to move even as the night deepened and the cold sank into her bones. Her cheeks were streaked with dried tears, her fingers numb, and her eyes locked on the blue front door as though the answer to her pain lay behind it. She looked like someone who had run out of excuses to be strong and finally allowed herself to break. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, and second chances still matter in this world, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like this reach more hearts. Hannah had always been the kind of woman who put others first, even when it drained every last bit of her. She had come to Cedar Brook, a small town in northern Michigan, hoping for a fresh start after years of a difficult relationship that left her feeling small and forgotten. She had met Matthew Carter, the man who lived in the house she now sat outside of, at a church volunteer event months earlier. He was gentle, steady, and everything she had told herself she didn't deserve. Yet he treated her with a quiet respect that made her want to heal. They had spent months talking in coffee shops, walking through snow-covered parks, and slowly learning one another's scars. Matthew never pushed her to open up, he simply made space for her to feel safe. But trauma has a way of following people, and Hannah's past hadn't let her go easily. After an unexpected confrontation earlier that day with her former partner, one that left a small cut along her cheek, she panicked. She didn't want to go home, she didn't want to be alone, and she didn't know where else to go except to the one person who had ever made her feel seen. She had knocked on Matthew's door as the sky darkened, but he wasn't home. Instead of leaving, she sat down on the cold porch and waited, telling herself she would only stay a few minutes, but minutes turned into an hour, then 2, and soon she was too cold and too tired to walk away. When Matthew finally returned near dawn, brushing snow off his coat and humming absently, he froze at the sight of her. Hannah looked up, her face pale and trembling, her hair damp with snowflakes. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out, and she sank back down with a trembling breath that revealed just how long she had been there. Matthew immediately rushed to her, kneeling right in front of her, concern flooding his expression. But Hannah had already retreated inside herself, unable to speak, unable to meet his eyes, and afraid of what he might think. Matthew gently placed his hands on her shoulders, his voice low and steady as he asked her why she had been waiting out in the freezing cold all night. For a moment, Hannah fought the words rising in her throat. She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to appear weak. But when she finally lifted her gaze and saw the sincerity in his face, the gentle patience that had always made her feel safe, something inside her gave way. Her breath hitched, her shoulders collapsed, and she finally broke down in a way she had been holding back for years. She told him everything. How the man she had left behind cornered her on the street earlier that day, how he had grabbed her arm, shouted at her, and reopened old wounds she had tried so hard to bury, how she had run without thinking, her only instinct leading her to Matthew's doorstep, and how she was terrified of her past, terrified of trusting again, and terrified of burdening the one person who had ever genuinely cared. Matthew listened without interrupting, his jaw clenching at the thought of someone hurting her. When she finished, he didn't ask why she hadn't called, or why she hadn't told him sooner, or why she thought she didn't deserve help. He simply took off his warm gloves and gently wiped away the tears freezing on her cheeks. He helped her to her feet, guided her inside, and wrapped her in blankets while he made warm tea. Hannah sat at his kitchen table, shaking from both cold and release, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight in her chest begin to lift. Over the next hours, Matthew stayed by her side as she rested on his couch. He didn't force conversation. He didn't pry. He simply stayed close enough for her to feel safe. And as the storm continued outside, Hannah realized something profound. She had spent years convincing herself she had to endure pain alone, that her worth was tied to her silence. But here, in this small Michigan home, she found a refuge she never knew she needed. Later that afternoon, after she had warmed up and regained strength, Hannah apologized for causing trouble, but Matthew shook his head gently. He told her she wasn't trouble. She wasn't a burden, and she certainly wasn't alone anymore. His words, simple as they were, wrapped around her heart like the warmest blanket. She realized then that compassion wasn't weakness, that letting someone care wasn't giving up control, and that healing sometimes began with letting one person in. Slowly, the fear in her eyes softened. Her shoulders no longer shook, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe without feeling guilty for it. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this: she wasn't running anymore, she wasn't hiding, and she wasn't going to let her past define her. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your engagement helps these emotional stories reach more people who may need them. Special request: before you go, comment below what part of the story moved you the most.